Hello cats and kitties, and welcome back to another ASMR video. Today we are going to do a reading. We're going to do a reading from Beatrix Potter's The Complete Peter Rabbit. As you can see, we've got a lovely sort of baby blue book here. We've got Peter Rabbit in the middle, and a picture of Peter. He's eating some radishes, and I believe he must be in Mr. McGregor's garden. Got a little bird watching here. Over here, we have a butterfly, and this butterfly is carved into the book in relief. And we also have a watering can over here, also carved into the book. We have these beautiful leaves and flowers that go all the way around the book. It's really a very, very pretty book. It's out of the Barnes & Noble special edition that they do, and they always do such a nice job. And if we open the book, we will see basically a map of where Peter Rabbit and his friends and everyone from that world lives. And it's a 2-page map. It goes all the way across to the other page. And you can see some of the names of the people that Beatrix Potter writes about. Timmy Tiptoes, Benjamin Bunny, the Flopsy Bunnies, Mr. McGregor's garden, Mrs. Tittlemouse, Jemina Puddle Duck, Tom Kitten, all of these interesting places where these wonderful tales come from. So let's turn the page. There we see Peter. This is Peter from The Tale of Benjamin Bunny, where he and his cousin get into all sorts of a mess by going to Mr. McGregor's garden. And this is him dropping his handkerchief full of onions. See his pretty blue coat. And this is the front, the title page, which looks exactly like the front page. And we shall turn the page. We have the table of contents. Interesting about the table of contents, these all look like they are chapters, but each complete tale was published as a book. So these are all little children's books. And interesting, the tale of Peter the Rabbit began by Beatrix Potter writing letters to the children of a friend. And she wrote specifically to a little boy named Noel who was sick, and that was who she wrote the tale of Peter Rabbit to. And interestingly enough, about the tale of Benjamin Bunny, Beatrix Potter actually had a rabbit named Benjamin. So it is supposed that the tale of Benjamin Bunny is inspired by her rabbit. Growing up, Beatrix Potter had tons of small little pets, rabbits, mice, birds, and she would like to illustrate them, draw pictures of them. And when she and her family, when she was young, they would go on holiday. They would go on holiday to Scotland, and she would draw pictures of the animals there. And so, with this talent of drawing pictures for animals and these stories that she made up when she wrote letters to her friends' children, this is where we got the complete works of Peter Rabbit. So, let's go ahead and start, shall we? Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said the old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields, or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Well, that got dark quickly, didn't it? Turn the page. Now, run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out. Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. And there they are, gathering their blackberries, getting a little help from the birds, aren't they? But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuce and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes, and there we have the picture that we saw on the front of the book, don't we? Yeah. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But around the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees, planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" There he goes, yelling, "Stop, thief," to Peter. Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, there it is, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he went on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have gotten away if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. There he is, caught in the gooseberry net. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. So now he's lost his jacket and his shoes, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Uh-oh. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was in the shed somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed. "Kerchoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. There he is, in the water can. And he tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. So there's Peter knocking over the plants, and there's Mr. McGregor's foot. He's just almost right upon him, isn't he? And here we have Peter without his coat or shoes. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright. He had not the least idea which way to go, and he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas. and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. There he goes under the gate. And there the birds are cheering him on. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten away the blackbirds. They don't look terribly scared, do they? Peter never stopped running or looked behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down on the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes Peter had lost in a fortnight. And there he is, just laid out on the floor. Bless his heart. I'm sorry to say that Peter did not feel very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. And there's Peter in bed. And his sisters are watching. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. There they are eating their good supper. Because they were good. So they got a nice supper. Okay. Let's get to our next tale. We have to turn a few pages to get to it. Okay, here is our next tale. The Tale of Benjamin Bunny. And as you can see, this one was written in 1904. And look at Benjamin. Here he is. He is Peter Rabbit's cousin. One morning, a little rabbit sat on a bank. He pricked his ears and listened to the trit-trot of a pony. A gig was coming along the road. It was driven by Mr. McGregor, and beside him sat Mrs. McGregor in her best bonnet. As soon as they passed, little Benjamin Bunny slid down into the road and set off with a hop, skip, and a jump to call upon his relations who lived in the wood at the back of Mr. McGregor's garden. That wood was full of rabbit holes, and in the neatest, sandiest hole of all lived Benjamin's aunt and his cousins, Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. Old Mrs. Rabbit was a widow. She earned her living by knitting rabbit wool mittens and muffetees. I once bought a pair at a bazaar. She also sold herbs and rosemary tea and rabbit tobacco, which is what we call lavender. See, there she is making things to go sell. Little Benjamin did not very much want to see his aunt. He went around the back of the fir tree and nearly tumbled upon top of his cousin Peter. Peter was sitting by himself. He looked poorly and was dressed in a red cotton handkerchief. "Peter," said little Benjamin in a whisper, "who has your clothes?" There's Peter. All he has to wear is a red handkerchief. I think we know what happened to his clothes, don't we? Peter replied, "The scarecrow in Mr. McGregor's garden," and described how he had been chased about the garden and dropped his shoes and coat. Little Benjamin sat down beside his cousin and assured him that now Mr. McGregor had gone out in a gig, whichever, and Mrs. McGregor also, and certainly for the day, because she was wearing her best bonnet. Peter said he hoped that it would rain. At this point, old Mrs. Rabbit's voice was heard inside the rabbit hole, calling, "Cottontail, Cottontail, fetch me some more chamomile." Peter said he thought he might feel better if he went for a walk. So there they are, Paw and Paul, getting ready to go for a walk. They went away hand in hand and got upon the flat top of the wall at the bottom of the wood. From here they looked down into Mr. McGregor's garden. Peter's coat and shoes were plainly to be seen upon the scarecrow, topped with an old tam-o'-shanter of Mr. McGregor's. Little Benjamin said, "It spoils people's clothes to squeeze under a gate. The proper way to get in is to climb down a pear tree." Peter fell down hard at first, but it was of no Peter fell down head first, but it was of no consequence, as the bed below was newly raked and quite soft. It had been sown with lettuces, and there he is, falling down. Luckily, the ground beneath him was nice and soft. They left a great many odd little footmarks all over the bed, especially little Benjamin, who was wearing clogs. Little Benjamin said the first thing to be done was to get back Peter's clothes in order that they might be able to use the pocket handkerchief. They took him off the scarecrow. There had been rain during the night. There was water in the shoes, and the coat was somewhat shrunk. Benjamin tried on the tam-o'-shanter, but it was too big for him. There he is trying on the hat, the tam-o'-shanter. And he's right. It is a bit big for him, isn't it? And there's Peter putting on his coat. Then he suggested that they should fill the pocket handkerchief with onions as a little present for his aunt. Peter did not seem to be enjoying himself. He kept hearing noises. Benjamin, on the contrary, was perfectly at home and ate a lettuce leaf. He said that he was in the habit of coming to the garden with his father to get lettuces for their Sunday dinner. The name of Benjamin's papa was old Mr. Benjamin Bunny, and the lettuces were certainly very fine. There's Benjamin eating a lettuce leaf. Peter did not eat anything. He said he should like to go home, and presently he dropped half the onions. Uh-oh. There they are. Little Benjamin said it was not possible to get back up the pear tree with a load of vegetables. He led the way boldly towards the other end of the garden. It went along a little walk on planks and under a sunny red brick wall. The mice sat on their doorsteps, cracking cherry stones. They winked at Peter Rabbit and at little Benjamin Bunny. Let's see, there are the mice, right there. Presently, Peter let the pocket handkerchief go again. They got amongst flower pots and frames and tubs, and Peter heard the worst noises ever. His eyes were as big as lollipops. He was a step or two in front of his cousin, and then suddenly he stopped. So what do you think is going to happen? This is what those little rabbits saw around the corner. Little Benjamin took one look, and then in half a minute, less than no time, he hid himself and Peter and the onions underneath a large basket. The cat got up, stretched herself, and came and sniffed at the basket. Perhaps she liked the smell of onions. Anyway, she sat down on top of the basket. Uh-oh. She sat there for 5 hours. I cannot draw you a picture of Peter and Benjamin under the basket because it was quite dark, and because the smell of onions was fearful, it made Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin cry. The sun got round behind the wood, and it was quite late in the afternoon, but still the cat sat on the basket. At last there was a pitter-patter, and some bits of mortar fell from the wall above. The cat looked up and saw old Mr. Benjamin Bunny prancing along the top of the wall of the upper terrace. He was smoking a pipe of rabbit tobacco and had a little switch in his hand. He was looking for his son. Old Mr. Bunny had no opinion whatsoever of cats. He took a tremendous jump off the top of the wall onto the top of the cat and cuffed it off the basket and kicked it into the greenhouse, scratching off a handful of fur. The cat was too surprised to scratch back. When old Mr. Bunny had driven the cat into the greenhouse, he locked the door. Then he came back to the basket and took out his son Benjamin by the ears and whipped him with the little switch. Then he took out his nephew Peter. He took out the handkerchief of onions and marched out of the garden. When Mr. McGregor returned about half an hour later, he observed several things which perplexed him. It looked as though some person had been walking all over the garden in a pair of clogs. Only the footmarks were too ridiculously little. Also, he could not understand how the cat could have managed to shut herself up inside the greenhouse, locking the door upon the outside. When Peter got home, his mother forgave him because she was so glad to see that he had found his shoes and coat. Cottontail and Peter folded up the pocket handkerchief, and old Mrs. Rabbit strung up the onions and hung them from the kitchen ceiling with the bunches of herbs and the rabbit tobacco. The end. So that is our reading from the complete Peter Rabbit. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that it relaxed you. And I hope that you'll sleep well tonight. I hope that you guys are staying safe and taking care of each other. And I will see you in the next video.